Hey nerds, what's up? So in case you missed it, this week Sanderson dropped a bomb on his fans in the form of 5 books that he has written during quarantine and 4 of which he's releasing in a Kickstarter. Don't worry, you and I, we don't need to tally what we did over the pandemic. But this Kickstarter went wild. It reached its goal of $1 million in mere minutes, and within 24 hours had become the second highest funded Kickstarter of all time. As of this recording right now, and I'm literally checking it because it's going up constantly, it's at $19.9 million in just 3 days. We still have 27 days left to go, and there is no doubt at this point that this will be the top most funded Kickstarter of all time. This justifiably had us all reeling, and it wasn't just because Sanderson trolled us really hard. This amount of money so quickly had us feeling like something was changing, and we started saying the publishing world is changing forever, me included. But I'm actually glad I waited to do a response for a few days, because the more I thought about it, the more I questioned, is publishing really changing from this Kickstarter? The thing is, Sanderson is one of the most, if not the most well-known fantasy author in the modern space today. He has made a huge ride or die fan base in the last decade by being friendly, being there for fans, and also just putting in a crazy amount of quality output. He proved his ride or die fanship with his wildly successful Way of Kings Kickstarter in 2020 that earned around $7 million for a special edition of a book that his fans already owned. Sanderson also doesn't have a normal relationship with Tor Publishing compared to other authors. He has admitted himself that he has a much more open relationship with them, using often his own editors, his own art. He has way more control over his work. It honestly reminds me a little bit of Taylor Swift in the music industry. After she left her last label, Big Machine Records, people often wondered why she signed on with Universal Records. Does she need a record label when she's as well known as she is? In fact, the owner of that record label himself said, "Taylor Swift doesn't work for me, I work for Taylor Swift." That kind of feels like Brandon Sanderson and Tor Publishing. So why did she? Well, I think it's related to why Brandon still uses Tor Publishing and probably won't go self-published fully anytime soon. So today we're gonna look at what has disrupted the publishing industry in the last decade, what this Kickstarter may mean for self-publishing in the future, and how worried Tor should be over this newest project of Brandon Sanderson's. See you after the jump. First, we can guess what the biggest disruption to the publishing industry in the last decade has been, and that is ebooks. Now, I talked about this pretty extensively with Leanna on our live comparing physical to to audiobooks, but essentially ebooks came in and carved out a huge portion of the market, but then stayed steady. So it's carved out the portion it's going to carve out, but didn't totally get rid of physical books forever like people thought at the time. It's now steady. That disruption's kind of over. We know what it looks like, but it was a huge disruption at the time. So you might be saying, well, is Kickstarter the next big disruption? Well, we're missing a huge one, and that's Amazon. Sanderson talked about this on his live after he announced his Kickstarter and also most recently in the New York Times article. Amazon is responsible for selling over half of all printed books in the United States, and their hold on ebooks and audiobooks is even greater. Sanderson himself said that over 80% of his sales go through Amazon. He said, "If Amazon's grip on the industry is weakened, that's good for the publishers. They are very much under Amazon's thumb right now. I don't want to present this as Brandon versus Amazon. Amazon's great, but I think in the long run, Amazon being a monopoly is actually bad for Amazon. If they don't have competition, they will stop innovating." So what are other ways that Amazon has disrupted the publishing industry? Well, it was their creation of the Kindle in 2007 that really pushed forward the ebook revolution. In 2008, Amazon purchased Audible, and in a huge and important shift for self-published authors, they popularized the print-on-demand service that allows publishing to be that much easier. And another huge thing for self-published works, Kindle Unlimited, which is essentially the streaming service of the book industry. But also, just in the rise of the internet age in general, and obviously Amazon contributes to this, there is just more content than ever. Content is at our fingertips constantly, which means it's even harder to stand out. The bookstore isn't the only place we're going for our content. We can literally browse hundreds of thousands of things right at our fingertips. So the publishing industry has changed, but it's been slow and over decades and are sometimes hard to notice until we look back. But it does somehow feel like we're on this precipice of this revolution with self-publishing. And so I want to talk a little bit like what's holding us back and what does that Kickstarter mean in terms of moving forward with self-publishing. Now, I did an entire video on self-publishing, so if you want more details, you can watch that. But I think the biggest hurdle right now for self-publishing is respect. Big publishing houses have a lot of weight behind them. We know they have tons of professional editors and artists and things that make books feel, read, and look legitimate and be legitimate. Now, while the stigma against self-published is bad because a lot of self-published is really well done, the problem is you pick up 1 or 2 bad self-published books and it can really ruin your perception forever because you're not tying it to the author, you're tying it to, oh, that must be self-publishing. And so I think that stigma is going to be something that's really hard to get over. And I'm not really sure what's needed to change that perception. Additionally, publishing houses offer advertisement, a hugely expensive thing, and they know all the avenues. They can auto put you in a bookstore, which is a hurdle that's very, very difficult for self-published authors. They make it into a local one, but like a Barnes & Noble's on a grand scale is almost impossible. Of course, some authors choose to stay self-published or even go back to self-publishing after being traditionally published. A lot of the reasoning that is cited is they wanted more control over their work. A lot of times these publishing houses take it, and if you're not Brandon Sanderson, you may not get to choose your title, you don't get to choose your art, and they may request you to make changes that you really don't want to make or put you on a publishing schedule that you don't want that's taking too long. Some examples of these would be Will White, who is a hugely famous and successful self-published author and has been self-published the entire time, and of course Michael J. Sullivan, who was self-published, went traditionally published, and I think is back to self-publishing or at least half self-publishing for that greater control. Since they already have significant fan bases, things like Kickstarter and Amazon's print on demand can be very lucrative. They already have their advertising down, they still need to advertise, but they have that core base of fans who can give them the money for Kickstarter or things like that. They're the kind of people that I think are the most interesting because they're not Brandon Sanderson with all these like privileges and traditionally publishing as well, but they kind of made their own space. But again, you need that following, and that is the tough part. On the surface, Sanderson's wildly successful Kickstarter may make self-published authors feel more willing to try a Kickstarter. Maybe they see that success and feel like Kickstarter is a space that can accept books. And it's getting so publicized, it may make people who wouldn't normally look at a book Kickstarter be more interested in publishing through Kickstarter, be more interested in purchasing and supporting self-published books. This amount of visibility can mean something for them. Plus, self-published authors don't need $19 million. Something even like $10,000 and orders all at once could mean a lot to a new author. But what about the future of publishing? This Kickstarter isn't quite as disruptive as I think we think it is. Again, Sanderson has way more control with his publisher than most authors, and he has a huge fan base. On top of that, he also has his own publishing company already established and a warehouse with employees, which the average author and even the not so average author probably doesn't have. In fact, Kristen McLean, the director of business development at NPD Books, said, "Publishers need authors to be entrepreneurs these days. This is just going to build his profile and continue to drive the backlist sales of all his books." The New York Times article that this is from goes on to talk about how this really isn't possible or even wanted for a lot of authors. But the few authors who could leverage something like this, as it was stated, may not necessarily be bad for publishers. It may be something that's mutually beneficial. With all that extra content out there, authors who are going above and beyond to really advertise themselves and create new things for their fans may create a larger fan base and, again, sell more of that backlog. Another huge issue that so many of you brought up on my Instagram when we were talking about this is international sales. Kickstarter makes the physical copies much harder to obtain for those international fans who are probably going to settle on the ebook editions so they don't have to pay astronomical shipping prices. And international fans want physical books too. And if Sanderson went to a full Kickstarter method, that would make it very difficult for them to obtain these without those astronomical shipping prices. They want his books in their bookstores where they can just go pick it up. Now, international sales might not be something really on the mind of fledgling self-published authors, but it is a huge thing that publishing houses offer. Now, I did want to mention something else interesting that the Heavens Bazaar brought up on my Instagram when we were talking about this. Kickstarter was a great avenue for board games. Creators would spend a lot of time developing these board games, but they're expensive to produce, and you need a lot of capital up front to get all those pieces and all those things together. So they often took to Kickstarter Kickstarter these indie board games because it was a great way to see exactly how much you needed to put into production. Board games were so successful on Kickstarter that a lot of the famous board game publishing houses started to also use Kickstarter as a way to get their games out because it was so convenient and people were buying board games on Kickstarter. And I for sure know from personal experience that Kickstarter is a great place for board games. We've bought several off there. All of my board gamey friends buy tons off of Kickstarter. It's a very board game place. So the Heavens Bizarre idea was like, there may be a time where publishing houses start leveraging Kickstarter themselves, just like these board game companies when they see a trend. So it may not just be Kickstarter v. publishing houses. There may be a way that this evolves together. Now, while I do think publishing is changing, and I do think self-publishing is on the ride, and we are gonna see a major shift there in the future, I just don't know what it's gonna look like, and I am not convinced Kickstarter is the thing it's gonna look like. I think we're gonna see a slow shift, and it may be in ways we just don't expect, and I certainly don't necessarily have a vision for it. And finally, I wanna talk a little bit about Tor and Sanderson because that's what brought us here today. So the question is like, how worried should Tor be about this insane Kickstarter? Off the bat, it's very clear that Sanderson has a very good relationship with Tor, his publisher. He's said so himself several times, and recently after this Kickstarter was launched. I think Tor definitely has a contract with him, at least for the Stormlight Archive books and the rest of the Mistborn books, if not others. So I think he'll stick with them for at least those, if not more. And Sanderson has also stated that he has no interest in becoming a publishing house for other authors, so really his publishing company is just for himself. And he also stated that he really wants his books in bookstores, which is one of the major reasons he will stay with a publishing house. He honestly said this was mostly an experiment, and I really recommend reading the New York Times article. It's really excellent and short, and I will link it below because it sums up his feelings very well. And then of course we've also talked about the issue of getting things to his international fans. And so it's not like Tor is losing its giant moneymaker anytime soon. And in fact, if I'm correct, I remember hearing Sanderson talk about the fact that Tor wasn't interested in doing special editions, so he's been doing those himself. Now, am I a little surprised Tor wasn't more interested in those special editions after the wild success of the Way of Kings Kickstarter? Yeah, but maybe why would they want to do that since it doesn't compete with their Way of Kings, since they're in vastly different money markets and really for vastly different people. But that's kind of why I think this Kickstarter is a little different and should be a little bit more worrying. This is 4 new books, and I don't know if they were expecting Sanderson fans to quite show up like they did for these new books, but new books means new content, and new content means things that Tor could have published. Now, I don't even know if they were given the option. My thought is that Brandon probably wanted to do this himself so it could really drop the whole 4 books in 1 year, and I'm guessing that publishing schedule wouldn't really work with Tor. Now, is his contract open enough that he didn't even have to go to them or tell him he was doing this? There's so many unknowns to really know how Tor feels about this. Personally, if I were Tor, I'd at least be questioning it. Like, why aren't we publishing these? Could we have done a fast track so to do it like he wanted? I think that's at least a question. I mean, $19.5 million in 3 days. If anything, I wonder if this sort of thing will lead to more ironclad contracts between publishing houses and their authors. If they see more authors do this in huge success, maybe it'll start being written into contracts so that those publishing houses don't lose money. When is it symbiotic and when do they feel like they're losing enough money to be harmful? Although maybe Tor just wants to be on the forefront of change, and maybe they're very happy about this and want to start moving in a Kickstarter direction or in a more untraditional methods. We don't know. Thanks for joining me in this mini dive. Overall, I don't think the publishing industry has changed quite as much as we think from this single moment. I think if anything, this just proves what a giant mountain Brandon is in the fantasy genre, and really goes to show the immense work he has done creating a loyal fan base because of how much content he gives us. And I think it's really more of a testament to Sanderson than really publishing. Look, we've seen a lot of changes to publishing over the last decade, and I expect them to keep changing in ways we don't know. I just don't think traditional publishing is going the way of the dinosaur quite yet. Let me know any details I missed and what your opinion is on all of this. Let's continue the discussion down in the comments. I'm sure there are so many things I missed. Let's keep it going. And as always, if you like this type of content, please share and subscribe to my channel. That is the best way you can help me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as in real-time updates on things like this, you should follow me on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.